What's up, everybody? This is Romano DeFranco here, and welcome to episode 13 of the Hockey Story series. The fourth overall choice in the NHL entry draft has used to select some great players over the years. Whether it's recent stars like Alex Pietrangelo, Evander Kane, Nicholas Backstrom, and Seth Jones, rising stars like Brady Tkachuk, Mitch Marner, Sam Bennett, and Cal McCarr, even Hall of Famers like Roberto Luongo, Steve Yzerman, Ron Francis, and Paul Correa, teams who own the fourth overall choice can very well pick up quite the talented player. When you're taking such a high pick and being the best of your age group, that provides lots of opportunities to get your NHL career off to a great start. It's tough because it comes with pretty lofty expectations because if you can't become an undisputed superstar in the NHL or even a legitimate player in the few years after your selection, you could not only be seen as a draft bust, but you could also be regarded as one of the worst picks of your class, hell, even the draft. One player chosen at this position would be remembered, but it's for all the wrong reasons. This is the story of Griffin Reinhart, who went from 4th overall to China. In order to tell this sob story, I would like to take you back to May 6, 2009, which was when 15-year-old defenseman Griffin Reinhart was selected 3rd overall by the Edmonton Oil Kings. Having posted 34 points in 32 games with the Vancouver Northwest Giants during the 09-10 season, Reinhardt would join the Oil Kings roster for a 2-game stint to close out the season before officially making the cut with the team in the 10-11 season. When he was in the major system full-time, the Vancouver native showed why he was touted so high by a group of scouts. Griffin would score 18 goals and 61 assists in 103 games combined in 2 years. As a matter of fact, his 36-point campaign during his draft year in 2011-2012 certainly helped the Oil Kings book their ticket in the 2012 WHL playoffs. Unfortunately, his contribution was a bit less impressive as he scored only 8 points in 20 games. This production was still good enough to help the Oil Kings eliminate the Portland Winterhawks in 7 games to clinch the 2012 WHL playoff championship. Griffin's recent championship, coupled with his play over the last 2 years, was considered so good that he attracted a lot of attention for the upcoming NHL entry draft. Mateusz Strociak, who was working for Elite Prospects at the time, had this to say about the 18-year-old Canadian defenseman. He stated, "A large defenseman with solid skills on both ends of the ice, a strong player with room for improvement in his physical game. Griffin Reinhart gives out a good first pass and skates well. Even though he isn't a flashy player at best, the Canadian defenseman is capable of handling big minutes." On top of that, sentiments felt by a large amount of scouts and general manager felt like this is the right idea to make Griffin one of the best prospects in the entire draft class. Because of that, he was expected to be in the top 10, hell, even in the top 5 too. These predictions were proven to be true on June 21st, 2012, as the Vancouver, British Columbia native was taken 4th overall by the New York Islanders. That's right, after establishing his game at the juniors and developing into a top 4 D-man at the NHL level, Reinhart was chosen as the 4th best player of his age group. Even though he was so excited, Griffin still had a long way to go before he was ready to make his NHL debut. Following his selection, the Canadian defenseman returned to the Edmonton Oil Kings roster and spent the next 2 years there. In that time, he established his game even as an overager. Although Griffin remained an important aspect in the Oil Kings lineup, he wasn't exactly able to take his next step in the offensive side of the game. By that I mean, Reinhardt scored an almost reduced rate than his pre-draft years. He scored just 12 goals and 50 points in 104 games. And despite this sharp decrease in his statistics, Griffin continued to be a defensive juggernaut in the major junior circuit. Not only did the Canadian defenseman help the Edmonton Oil Kings to the WHL playoff championship for the second time in 3 years, he won the 2014 Memorial Cup too. Once the 13-14 season had ended, and with Griffin Reinhart becoming too old to return to the Oil Kings roster for another year, the Canadian defenseman turned pro and looked to make the cut with the New York Islanders. Following a successful training camp, Reinhart got his wish and he made the team's opening night roster. On October 10, 2014, The Vancouver, British Columbia native decked out his blue and orange jersey of the Islanders for the very first time and made his NHL debut against the Carolina Hurricanes. Even though he was given so many chances to make an impact in the very first game of his NHL career, since he played 15 minutes of ice time, the fourth overall selection was not able to record a single number on the scoreboard. Despite that, the Islanders won by a final score of 5-3 against Carolina. Although he had himself a quiet debut, the Canadian defenseman got to stay on the Islanders roster for the next two games, which included a home game against the Hurricanes and an away game against the New York Rangers. Having taken one shot on net, 2 penalty minutes, and a -1 in these set of games, Griffin was demoted to the Bridgeport Sound Tigers of the AHL. Reinhart stayed with the Sound Tigers organization for the next 2 months and became a big player for the team by regaining his confidence with the team. This production led to the Canadian defenseman being recalled to the Islanders roster on December 1st, 2014, and from there he was given another chance to earn a full-time spot in the NHL level, starting with the game against the Ottawa Senators. Reinhart spent the next 5 games of the season with New York, in which he scored his first NHL point 1 week later during a game against the Minnesota Wild. That was his only contribution on the scoreboard during his second chance there, as he was assigned back to the Bridgeport Sound Tigers following a game against the New Jersey Devils. Griffin then spent the remainder of the year with the team. Reinhart would score 7 goals, 15 assists, and 22 points in 59 games with the team. That said, he did suit up for the New York Islanders during the Stanley Cup playoffs, but he failed to put up any points on the score sheet, and worst of all, he was a -2 as well. So, yeah, the less we talk about it, the better. In his first season of pro hockey, the Canadian defenseman suited up in 8 NHL games where he scored only a single point, a +1, a 6 penalty minutes, and 4 shots on net. That's not what you're expecting from a 4th overall choice, but you know Griffin Reinhart was only 21 years old, and he had all the time to become a solid blue liner for years to come. Sadly, it would not be with the New York Islanders. On June 27, 2015, Griffin Reinhart was traded to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for the 16th and 33rd overall selections of the 2015 NHL entry draft. So that means that his career will be heading north of the border again, and he would get the chance to earn a full-time roster spot in the NHL in a city where he produced so much success during his years in juniors. The bad news for Reinhart and the Oilers was things didn't quite work the way either of them would have wanted to. The 15-16 season would see Griffin impress the coaching staff of Edmonton out of training camp and earn an opening night roster spot on October 8, 2015 against the St. Louis Blues. Even though his potential gave him a chance to force his way on the Oilers roster as well as push himself for a spot in the top 4 if he played well enough, the opposite happened to him again. Griffin would split the season with the Oilers and the Bakersfield Condors of the AHL, never finding a permanent place on either of the team's roster in that time. Do you know what the biggest problem was? The problem was Griffin Reinhart played well enough in the minor leagues to be given a chance in the NHL. But when he was there, Reinhart was never able to make an impact on himself, prompting his team to send him back down to the minors, in which the cycle repeated itself. By the end of the season, Reinhart would score 2 goals and 8 assists in 10 points in 30 AHL games, whereas he scored a single point in 29 NHL games. He recorded a single point in a game on January 23rd against the Nashville Predators. Overall, the former 4th overall selection would score just a single point, produce 20 penalty minutes, 24 shots on goal, and was a -6. Yeah, I know it's not great, and so what? Reinhart was only 22 years old, and defensemen often take time to become NHL ready than forwards do, so he still had time to live up to his potential and become a dominant defenseman at the NHL level. Would he, though? Not really. No. The 16-17 season saw Reinhart have the worst start to the season since his pro hockey career began. That's because he was unable to secure a place on the Oilers' opening night roster spot out of training camp. Instead, he began the year in Bakersfield and looked to impress the Oilers front office in the hopes of potentially getting another shot at the NHL level. To add insult to injury, the call-up would never come, as Griffin spent the entire season with the Condors organization, where he scored 7 goals, 14 assists, and 21 points in 54 games. He did suit up in the 2017 Stanley Cup playoffs, but he played in only a single game and tallied the lone assist as the Oilers would lose in the Western Conference semifinals in 7 games to the Anaheim Ducks. But hey, at least he scored a point though. Having spent the previous 2 years with the Edmonton Oilers and having flunked to become a mainstay on an NHL roster, and let alone a productive man in the league, the Oilers ran out of patience on the underachiever. Luckily, the Oilers would get their wish, as on June 21st, 2017, it was announced that the NHL's newest expansion franchise at the time, Vegas Golden Knights, had selected Griffin Reinhart in the 2017 NHL expansion draft. And because of that, Griffin has now joined his 3rd team in the last 4 years. This transaction seemed to be a match made in heaven for both parties, because Vegas acquired a player who was in his early 20s who can still transform himself into a strong NHL player, even though he's getting a fresh start in a new city again. However, this gamble was all for naught. Once he joined the Golden Knights organization, Reinhart would once again start off the year in the AHL, this time with the Golden Knights affiliate team, the Chicago Wolves. Though he hoped to make his way back up to the NHL and earn a full-time roster spot with the Vegas Golden Knights, his call-up never went to fruition. Instead, the Canadian defenseman spent the next 2 years with the Wolves, where he scored only 6 goals and 28 points in 135 AHL games. To add insult to injury, Griffin Reinhart never even suited up in a Golden Knights jersey during his time there. Basically speaking, his lone playoff game with the Edmonton Oilers in 2017 would stand as the final game of his NHL career. That's right, the 4th overall choice of the 2012 NHL entry draft, a guy who was recognized as one of the best players in his age group, only played 37 NHL games at the time, and worst of all, he scored a measly 2 points. You heard what I said, 2 points in 37 games from a 4th overall pick? That is too true. This guy was a bust. To add insult to injury, the 16th overall selection that the Oilers gave to the Islanders in the trade was used to choose Matthew Barzal, who won the Calder Memorial Award for Rookie of the Year in 2018. So the Oilers got 2 years of a horrible Griffin Reinhart before letting him get picked up for free in the expansion draft, while the Islanders got a player who was the best rookie since John Tavares in 2009. And on top of that, Barzal was the first Islanders player to win the Rookie of the Year award since Brian Berard in 1997. Wow. Just wow. Talk about pouring salt on an open wound. Yeah, it's pretty much obvious that Griffin Reinhart flunked to live up to the hype and expectations that come with being a top 5 pick in the draft. But the question remains, why? Why was he unable to become the player that so many teams and scouts expected the man to be? For starters, if you want the short answer, he was not able to continue the success he had in the WHL into the NHL. Worst of all, Griffin could not compete with the best players in the world. If you want the long answer, let's flash back to the report I talked about earlier in the video and see if we can pinpoint a few answers here and there. For starters, it was claimed that Griffin was a large defenseman with solid skills on both ends of the rink. At 6'4" and 212 pounds, I could agree that Reinhart was a large defenseman like Zdeno Chara. Even though he was highly successful on both ends of the rink during his time in juniors and in the minors as well, he didn't showcase these skills in the NHL level. Whether the competition he was facing made it tough for him, Griffin was trying to play it too safe as he didn't want to make a mistake and or didn't find the right opportunity to showcase his talents. The Canadian defenseman just wasn't as good as expected when he was playing in the league. Second of all, Griffin was described as a strong player with room for improvement in his physical game. Well, I don't want to say that Griffin Reinhart was the worst player physically during his time in the NHL. Physically, he was about neck and neck. Let's think about it for a second. The Canadian defenseman recorded 76 hits, according to a report on hockeyreference.com. so that's 2 hits per game at the very least. Well, considering he was 6'4", 212 pounds, you would want to see Griffin Reinhart throw the body more than he did. Third of all, the claim that he was defensively sound, which was not the case at the NHL level. That's not even mentioning that the Canadian defenseman finished with a -5 and 26 penalty minutes in 37 games. So it's safe to say that he hindered his team more than actually helping them out. One last thing, Griffin Reinhart is capable of handling big minutes. Okay, even though this may have been the case at other points during his development, the Canadian defenseman just couldn't handle big minutes whatsoever. For example, in the 8 games he played over 20 minutes of ice time during his NHL career, the Vancouver, British Columbia native recorded a negative plus-minus rating in 5 of them. Worst of all, he had a positive plus in just 1 game. Don't get me wrong, a plus-minus is not necessarily a perfect stat to measure a player's effectiveness, and all these 8 games with the Oilers during the 15-16 season, who weren't exactly a competitive team at the time, but Reinhart was a member of that roster for a majority of the year. That said, he contributed to the mediocrity as much as anybody else did. So in conclusion, Griffin Reinhart failed to make it to the NHL long term, as he was never able to showcase his offensive skills at the NHL level. He was alright physically, but just couldn't handle big minutes. That's why the Canadian defenseman was disappointing defensively. Well, okay, I may have been blunt in my comments. However, when you're the 4th overall pick in your draft class, the expectations are overwhelmingly sky high, so anything less than the best just isn't good enough. As far as I know, it's a good thing that Griffin Reinhart never struggled with the injury bug and no off-ice baggage. You can make an argument saying that there's no excuse for him not panning out the way anybody would have wanted to. Therefore, his 4th overall selection was more of a curse than an actual blessing. If he was taken later in the first round and or even deeper into the draft, his career not panning out would have been far less frustrating and understandable too. However, when you're taken as the 4th best player of your age group, not only do you need to be a regular on an NHL roster, but you're also expected to be the savior of your franchise. That was something that Reinhart just could not accomplish in the NHL whatsoever. Regardless with how and why things didn't go the way they did, the Canadian defenseman's NHL career ultimately didn't go the way anybody would have hoped to. However, that doesn't mean to say that Griffin Reinhart is not done playing hockey just yet. After 2 years at the Chicago Wolves, the Vancouver, British Columbia native would move forward from Vegas' organization as he looked for another team to help him return to the NHL for the foreseeable future. When no team expressed serious interest in the 25-year-old who had been on the decline recently, Reinhart decided to take his talents overseas. Instead of joining the Finnish Liga, the Swedish Hockey League, or even the Swiss National League, he signed a 1-year deal with Cologne Red Star of the KHL. So having played his entire career in the juniors as well as his pro career in North America, Griffin Reinhart was off to China and hoping to get his career back on track. Would that happen? Nope, not even close. The 1920 season saw the Canadian defenseman suit up for Cologne Red Star for the first time and played even worse than he did in North America. Griffin would score just 2 points in 33 games with the Beijing side. That's the worst single-season production since he turned pro 5 years ago. When the 1920 season was over and seeing his production rendered all but useless in the past several years, Cologne quite understandably had zero interest in bringing Griffin Reinhart back for the following year. Rather than become an unrestricted free agent again, Griffin Reinhart was on the lookout for another team to give him another chance. So the former NHLer signed with the Iserlohn Roosters of the Deutsche Eishockey Liga, or DEL for short. The 2021 season saw the 26-year-old improve on his play, albeit a little bit but not by a whole lot, having scored 3 goals, 8 assists, and 11 points in 20 games. He also notched a single assist as the Roosters would lose to Eisbären Berlin. As soon as the 2021 season concluded, and despite his big improvement in his production, the Iserlohn Roosters did not issue him a qualifying deal. So on August 4th, 2021, the former NHLer signed a one-year deal with the Belfast Giants of the Elite Ice Hockey League. Little did Griffin Reinhart know that his upcoming year was his last. The 21-22 season saw the Canadian defenseman put up one of, if not the best season of his entire career, as he scored 3 goals, 29 assists, and 32 points in 53 games. I know what you're thinking, and yes, 32 points was the best in his professional career. Remember, he was a 4th overall pick. These numbers were indeed good enough to help his new side get into the playoffs. Unfortunately, his team would fall short of a championship thanks to a final round loss to the Cardiff Devils. Despite putting up impressive statistics for the Belfast Giants, the team decided not to tender Griffin Reinhart a qualifying deal to make him an unrestricted free agent for the 3rd time in as many years. As a matter of fact, not a single team signed him for the upcoming 22-23 season. With the season getting closer and closer, and with no offers coming his way, Griffin Reinhart decided to announce his retirement at the age of 28 years old. Shortly after this announcement, the Canadian defenseman seemingly went radio silent and he fell off the hockey map. There was little to no information to where he was or what he was doing. So he is essentially left homeless life post-NHL. And although Griffin Reinhart produced an impressive career in the juniors and was considered to be the best of his age group, the Canadian defenseman was not able to earn a full-time roster spot in the NHL thanks to his play never adjusting very well. Honestly, seeing such a deep fall from grace is not supposed to be taken as a joke. That's just very sad. You know, he was given a lot of opportunities to shine in the NHL, but I just can't help but feel completely remorse for the guy. When I say that, I mean he was supposed to be the savior of the league, but to no avail, it just didn't work out well. Reinhart is hoping that everything will work out better for him off the ice rather than on it. Will that happen? Only time will tell. This concludes the story of Griffin Reinhart's journey from 4th overall to China. What do you think about his career? Do you think it could have gone better for him as a whole? Absolutely. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.